Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, a very special crossover episode of Locked On Wolves with Brendon Kleen of Locked On Suns. We're going to preview the Wolves-Suns matchup. We ask each other burning questions about the matchup, about the team that each other covers. It's a packed show today. Welcome into the crossover edition of Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Thursday, everybody. We're just 2 days away from game one of the round one matchup between the Wolves and the Phoenix Suns. Today on the show, it's a crossover episode along with Brendon Kleen of Locked On Suns. That's the whole show today. So I want to thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on Locked On Sports Minnesota on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, let's get to the conversation between me and Brendon. At the end of the show, I'll talk about what the plan is here for the next couple of days here at Locked On Wolves. And I'm really excited. We asked each other some questions about the team that we each cover, and we talked quite a bit about who's going to guard Kevin Durant and what's Karl-Anthony Towns' role in the Timberwolves offense. What are the Suns and their fans most worried about in this matchup when so many things went Phoenix's way in the regular season? A really, really robust conversation with Brendon. So let's go ahead and get to that right now.
Brendon Kleen, Ben Beecken, Locked On Suns, Locked On Wolves crossover, getting you ready for round one, a rematch of Sunday's game, coincidentally, of course, and a lot to get into. I'm going to start by asking Ben some questions. We'll toss it back, and he'll ask me some questions in the next segment. We'll wrap up with series predictions. But, Ben, I feel like where I want to start is I've poked around at some Wolves people's previews, listened to a little bit of your content this week, and obviously spent time thinking about it myself. Who do you think Karl-Anthony Towns guards in this series? And what can he do on offense to make himself valuable? I think that's one of the things this series is going to hinge on from a Minnesota standpoint.
Yeah, and we might as well jump to the end of the show. That was my Karl-Anthony Towns is the X factor in this. X factor is not the right term, but he's the kind of the linchpin for the series, right? In theory, the Timberwolves should be the favorites, right? They're the 3 seed. FanDuel has the Suns as the favorites to win the series, although the Wolves are slight favorites to win in game one. But if you listen to anybody nationally, especially, and frankly a lot of Wolves people too, the Suns are kind of the favorites right now, and Karl-Anthony Towns is kind of the fulcrum for this series because he has the ceiling of the Wolves is so high. If he's hitting on all cylinders, if he's functioning the way he needs to function, the Timberwolves offense is better than what they were for much of the season, or it can be at least. There were stretches where it was seemingly unstoppable, but at the end of the day, it was a middle of the pack offense with Karl-Anthony Towns on the floor. So to your question, I think he should guard Kevin Durant, because I think that's the Wolves' best chance to at least throw a big body at KD and give you a chance to switch, right? Because if you're screening that, then you can switch. And if Durant's in ISO, I think Cat can stay in front of him for the most part. He can give a good contest because of his length. And then that frees up Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels to guard Bradley Beal and Devin Booker. And my favorite, I really want Jaden McDaniels to guard Devin Booker. That's not what we saw on Sunday in game 82 of the regular season. We saw the Timberwolves try and use we saw the Timberwolves try a couple different things. We've seen them try the length on Kevin Durant with Jaden McDaniels. We've seen them try to be more physical with Ant, but I think they should switch it up completely, go with Cat, leave Jaden McDaniels to bother Devin Booker with length, and then some combination of Anthony Edwards and Nickeil Alexander-Walker guarding Bradley Beal. I think makes the most sense.
Yeah, I think the Suns, when they're actually humming, Ben, they can manipulate, I think, Cat no matter who he's on, right? And so some of that is maybe, I wouldn't say moot, but I also don't trust them to do that. So it's not simply who he defends, but it is at least probably the starting point of what you're looking at when the Suns are on the offensive end of the floor. I think I trust him the same way you do, a little more, to be a decent option against Durant, given what you said. But, there's also the concern over, well, what if the Suns attack that even in a regular kind of post-up ISO situation and Towns can be a little foul prone? Is that a way you go at that? There's not an awesome answer, but you could say the same thing about some Suns players, that it's not like they're a team full of perfect matchups either.
Right.
But that's kind of what makes this series fun, right? But what I wanted to go back to is Towns on offense. And one of the things that I didn't, because I would imagine Durant guards him, and it feels like in the games in between these two teams, we didn't see a lot of Ant-Cat pick and roll with Gobert maybe in the dunker spot or something. And that feels like a very basic adjustment or a basic thing that they can kind of spam that I think the Suns would struggle with. Yeah, maybe they just switch it, but okay, let Towns attack Beal in the post and let them try to, make Nurkic a helper and him maybe have to foul and some of those things. So what do you think of that side of the court and how effective Towns can be? Because Ant said exactly what you did. He said it today. Cat has to be the MVP of the series if we win it.
Yeah. And I've seen a lot of Wolves people, Wolves fans say like, hey, why can't the Wolves spam pick and roll? Why can't they, like I literally, I heard another podcast say something to the effect of like, why couldn't they just do what the Nuggets do, right? Go Jokic, Jamal Murray, pick and roll. And it's like, well, Ant's great and Cat's great, but they're not Jokic and Murray. They obviously don't have that chemistry, and Jokic is the best player in the league. So I agree. I think they should do a little more of that. But I went back and watched the first game that these two teams played against each other. There was no Bradley Beal in it, but the Timberwolves were at full strength. And this was way back in November. So months and months ago. Teams are different. I get it. But the Wolves tried a lot of pick and roll early in that game. And the Suns did a great job with their length, primarily of just kind of mucking it up. And where the Wolves actually found some success was, and actually they did this a little bit on Sunday once they were already down, 15, 20 points, is put Karl-Anthony Towns in the middle of the floor. Almost like you would do it in a zone where you put somebody at the nail at the free throw line and just kind of operate offense through that. They didn't really run any actions. They weren't trying to spring him free with the screen. They weren't screen and rolling with Cat as the screener. They were just like, hey, Cat, run to the free throw line and we're going to toss you the ball. And then you can operate there because you can go quicker. It's obviously much harder to double team in the middle of the floor. And so Cat's actually a pretty good passer. I thought when they tried to like screen him into a mid post at the free throw line extended, kind of like where Jokic likes to operate, then things got messy. Cat thought like, okay, I've got to shoot a mid-range jumper here, or I've got to, I have to do something. I have to make a crazy pass to somebody cutting baseline. But at the nail, it's almost like there's less thinking for Cat, which is important. And he doesn't always, do what he's supposed to do when it comes to that. He doesn't always go fast. But if he could get to the nail, think quickly, he can use his size. I mean, he's not really taller than Kevin Durant. I think he actually might be shorter, but he's bigger than KD, and he's good with his body when he's not committing offensive fouls, which you mentioned foul prone earlier. I'm more worried about the offensive fouls. He committed 3 against the Suns on Sunday than I am about the defensive fouls. But if you put Cat in the middle of the floor and then run Ant and everybody else off of Cat, Nas Reid, etc., then I think that's your best option. It keeps the Suns from having to double or keeps the Suns from being able to easily double team him. I'd also like to see him in the low block a little more. The Wolves really don't do that much anymore, but Cat's still one of the league's best low block players when he actually gets the opportunity. And so I'd love for Chris Finch to throw a curveball in there and run some Towns low box post ups and just kind of play off of that. And I know he struggles when he gets double teamed, but again, the key is if he goes quick, I think he could be okay. And if he has, Cat ended up playing pretty well in the playoffs last year against Denver. People remember the bad second half in the play-in against the Lakers. They remember, I think game 1 was bad against Denver when they got blown out. But he ended up having 2-3 really good games against Jokic and the Nuggets. So I think this Cat doesn't show up in the playoffs thing is maybe a little bit off. I'm more concerned about him coming back, obviously, after the injury. If he comes through, I mean, the ceiling is really high for this Wolves offense.
All right, we'll flip it around in a moment. A couple more questions for Ben. I would say that brings us to Anthony Edwards. And I like some of what you're talking about from a Towns perspective in that it would kind of flip the script on the Suns a little bit, right? I personally, and maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit on the Suns side of this, but I feel like, Ben, that what the Suns did to Ant is not going to be a solution permanently for 7 games. I don't think it was anything particularly complicated. I think we've seen it against a lot of young playmakers throughout the whole history of the NBA. Hey, we're going to clog the paint. We're going to make you into a passer. We're going to, be selective about who we help off of and make you kind of think and overthink and make decisions and all that stuff. And I feel like Ant's going to figure that out. He's been awesome in the playoffs every year. But if they put the ball in Towns' hands a little more, that lifts some of the pressure even yet more off of him. The question in there is, when he does have the ball and when the Suns do throw some of that stuff at him, what's your trust factor right now of Ant's ability to, let's say, beat the defense down the court in transition, make a pull-up three, kind of hit those early, swing passes or drop passes to beat the defensive rotations? Like, do you think he's at that point of next level offensive engine in the playoffs, or do you think it's going to have to be a little more balanced for him to be at his best?
I think he can be there. We've seen it from him. I mean, he's grown incrementally each of his seasons, and he got to that point late last season. There's maybe a little regression kind of, early mid this season, and then he kind of bounced back. And I think Ant's seen that, like you said, it's not super new, although what the Suns are being really aggressive with just completely loading up. It's almost like 3 are playing the ball. It's like 1 and 2 half players are committed to Ant, and then the other 2 guys are guarding the other 3 Wolves players on the other side, on the weak side of the court. And Ant's played right into their hands. And what we saw, especially Sunday, I think he only had 7 field goal attempts. So granted, there were a bunch of turnovers in there. He had the ball in his hands a lot. But he was spooked a bit more than we've seen him. And one of the great things about Ant, one of the things that everybody loves about him, is that he does have that it factor, and he does love the big stage, and he wants to, he wants the eyeballs to be on him. So I don't know that this was like he's not ready for the moment sort of a situation. I know you're not saying that, but I don't think that's what that is. I think he just sometimes isn't super consistent. He's 22 years old, and it's more just like him understanding the right thing, which he most of the time now gets the right thing to do. He just doesn't always do it. And I have more hope for him doing the right thing than Karl-Anthony Towns, which maybe says more about Cat than it does about Ant. But I do think that if Ant can remember to play fast, and frankly, like Ant said before, like Cat needs to go faster when he's got the ball so teams don't double team him. But Ant is the one who has kind of held back the Wolves' pace often this season. Is he'll get the ball and he likes to slow things down. But if he pushes pace when given the opportunity, that was one of the things the Wolves did well in the first matchup. Granted, that was a blowout loss, but going back and watching that, they actually, when they pushed pace, they got down the court and they scored. I mean, like when they run, they're actually one of the top 3 teams in the league in transition offense. They're just bottom 3 in terms of frequency. So that's going to be a key for me in this series. And Ant's got to be part of that. And then when the Suns load up on him in the half court, he just has to go quicker. Just like I said with Cat, it's going quicker, and it's obviously this is easier said than done, but making the right decision, right? Like if the rotation isn't quite there, you could go to the basket and draw a foul. And the Suns have said, Bradley Beal said, like, we're going to foul Ant. But if it's not, you got to swing the ball quickly and try and get that weak side corner 3 for, Mike Conley or whoever's in the other corner. So I think he absolutely can do it. I don't think it's a matter of the moment being too big. I don't think it's a matter of him not getting it. It's just him, not trying to play hero ball too much and him not overthinking things and just remembering he's got to go quick, and he's talented enough and this team's good enough. He's got enough talent around him that they should be okay if he makes quicker decisions.
All right. That's the top of the scouting report from the Minnesota side. Next up, Ben will ask me questions about what's going to determine this series from the Phoenix side. First, today's show brought to you by Monopoly Go. I've been told I'm a competitive person. We all have that competitive side to us. Probably comes out as we're sitting on our couches watching these playoff series and acting like lunatics. My competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. Downloaded it over 150 million times. A great twist on Monopoly, the classic game where you play on not one but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is messing with your friends. Charge them rent on your iconic properties, just like that classic Monopoly board game. Heist their vaults of riches for yourself and get those bragging rights on the leaderboards showing who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's not just my competitive side that loves Monopoly Go. You can team up with friends all around the world in time tournaments and get a little bit of a reward in your pocket. Get in the game. Join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play Store. All right, Ben, toss your questions my way. Let's talk Suns.
All right, let's do it. So obviously the season series was a disaster from the Wolves' point of view. They got blown out in November with a healthy Wolves team. They got beat without Cat by 10 in an offensively challenged game. One of the comments that you may have seen this has been going around the Wolves pod and blogosphere is that the Wolves' two worst defensive games in terms of individual game defensive rating this year were against the Suns, and their worst offensive game was against the Suns. And they went 0-3 against the Suns of the regular season, which, side note, that's one of the reasons why Wolves fans maybe could have a little bit of hope here is things can't get much worse than literally their worst defensive games and their worst offensive game of the season. So there's only, room to go up from there. But in the wake of the Suns, like, dominating everything, what do you think, Brendon, was most fluky about it? Like, what stands out as like, yeah, that we blew them out 3 times essentially, but like, this is what the Suns did, that we can't necessarily hope for again, or what makes you nervous about the Suns' performance in the regular season that you're not sure is sustainable against the Wolves specifically in the playoffs?
Yeah, I love this. This was my whole episode on Wednesday, but it's good to revisit with you more specifically because there's a few things. One, just some exactly what you said, flukes. I would not expect that Naz Reid is going to play as poorly as he did in those games. I didn't really see anything that made it. I mean, defensively, he had to try to guard Grayson Allen just like Kat did at one point. That's not ideal. But offensively, I think he can be impactful. His numbers in that last game were good, but some of that was when the game was already out of reach. I think he'll be impactful. I don't see why he wouldn't be. I believe 16 turnovers per game for the Wolves in those 3 matchups, which was one of their worst against any opponent. The Suns are not good at forcing turnovers. They're not a big team. They're not a crazy athletic team. I don't really see a reason why, outside of the Ant dynamic we talked about, if he can figure that out, if the Wolves can scheme around the aggressive help they're going to show him when he's driving to the basket, I don't really see another ingredient that makes me think, yeah, Minnesota's just going to cough the ball up that much all year or all series. And if that's not happening, you're not getting Suns transition offense. You're not getting some of those huge point totals, big runs, things like that. So I would expect that's just going to go away. And then some of it is approach, right? Like, I think rotation-wise, I talked about on the podcast, like, I'm feeling like the shrinkage of the Wolves rotation is probably going to go toward guys, obviously, who match up better with the Suns. That's what happens in the playoffs. Maybe more Nickeil Alexander-Walker, less Kyle Anderson, and guys that we know can give the Suns problems in terms of players who can switch across all of their big 3, players who can kind of stop actions at the point of attack and limit the Suns' ability to get to what they want to get to on offense. And last but not least, I mean, the Suns' defensive game plan, it obviously is 2 things at once, right? It is really 3, I would even say, right? They're playing off of the Wolves shooters, some guys who can shoot, and they're just making that calculated decision. So if those guys are more ready to take advantage and bomb away, Conley, McDaniels, etc., I think we could see some big shooting nights that scare the Suns and things have to be reevaluated. And they're kind of ignoring Gobert. They're having Nurkic step up on the pick and roll as part of how they're walling off those baskets or that area around the basket against Ant. I don't think the Wolves are just going to let that happen. Gobert had some post scoring and some, finishing, but what if he catches the ball 1-2 dribbles away? I think he's capable of making them pay if Nurk is going to just leave that space open for him around the basket. So there's some holes in what the Suns have done that I think the Wolves will definitely exploit, and I think the personnel and some of that flukiness will get ripped away. So I definitely think this will be a much more competitive series than those 3 blowouts would tell us.
Yeah, I tend to agree, you mentioned them ignoring Gobert, the Suns ignoring Gobert. Basically, I mean, he missed. You go back to the first game in November. The Timberwolves missed a ton of shots at the rim. Naz Reid was one of the primary culprits of that, really, throughout the season series. And Rudy missed a couple of lobs across these games that, like, he normally, he makes 95% of the time, literally. So there was some flukiness there, but the Suns also did a great job. Their scheme has been so good with Nurkic playing up in the pick and roll and also having low man help to try and, like, the Wolves haven't gotten a lot of easy lobs to Rudy. Like, even the ones he missed should have been converted, but by and large, like, the Suns were doing a good job at taking that away from the Wolves. And then they kind of get stuck in the no man's land, and the Wolves hate shooting mid-range jumpers, at least long mid-range jumpers. And so they kind of get caught in between, and then they end up turning the ball over. And like you said, that's another area I talked about on Locked On Wolves as well, where the Suns don't force a ton of turnovers. The Wolves turn it over a bunch, but the Suns on the flip side actually turn it over at a higher rate than the Wolves, at least on the season they did. So I'm wondering if that's something that maybe the biggest thing that kind of comes back to earth in the playoffs.
Yeah.
You mentioned in the last segment, the way the Suns have defended Anthony Edwards, maybe that's not sustainable over the course of a series. And I tend to agree in the sense that, I mean, it worked the last couple games, but at some point Ant's going to be able to figure it out. The Wolves are going to make some of those open shots because if you watch back, even just this last game, they missed some wide open corner threes. And that's one of the things I talked about on the show. The Suns give up corner threes defensively, and the Wolves generally make them at a decent clip. That wasn't the case here, or the last time out against the Suns. Assuming that at some point the Suns aren't able to completely load up and unbalance the floor against Ant, who do you think is the primary defender against Anthony Edwards? And what's the pick your poison calculation of the Suns defensively?
Yeah, I think it's going to be Beal. He's really cemented himself in that role down the stretch of the season. I mean, not even down the stretch, really, for the whole second half since he got back, dating back to January. He guarded Zion Williamson shortly after returning from his injury, and he did that again multiple times in April. So no matter who that guy is and what shape or size they come in, it's tended to be Beal. I would, say that Grayson Allen, they're not going to be scared of him ending up there. They're not going to be scared of Kevin Durant switching out there. And in the playoffs, historically now, new coaching staff, first run for Frank Vogel in the postseason leading this team, but Monty Williams wasn't afraid to put Devin Booker on some of those types of players in bigger moments. He guarded Chris Middleton in the finals. He guarded Russell Westbrook last year. He guarded, everybody, Jamal Murray. So Book could be a guy if it gets to a late game situation that you see out there. I agree, not just the catching kind of on maybe the role that I was talking about with Gobert, but those lobs I think are going to be there a lot of the time, and they're going to make especially Ant find it, make that pass. We know Conley can do it, but can Ant? And yeah, they're going to selectively leave shooters open, especially guys that aren't proven or aren't aggressive, like Jaden McDaniels or Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Mike Conley's not always the quickest trigger. He wants to kind of cycle through his options, maybe, read the defense and go from there. So I think a higher volume three-point shooting type of series for Minnesota would be better too. And look, the Suns team is also just small. So part of what I talked about is you get a switch or you get ahead of steam. Like the Suns don't exactly have the strongest, biggest team. You can just, okay, they're loading up. So what? Like I wouldn't be surprised if you saw Ant and Towns just get comfortable attacking some of these smaller Suns defenders. So there's a lot of open space here. And I do think Minnesota's, their offensive rating in this series, I would not be surprised if it's higher than it was in those 3 regular season games.
Yeah. I mean, like I said earlier, you really can't play worse than they did for stretches against the Suns, and we've seen the Wolves. Like said it multiple times. I like that Wolves. This is the worst matchup the Wolves could have, bar anybody. Yeah. Like honestly, I'd almost rather have them play one of the top 2 seeds in the West, just because there's certainly more confidence based on the regular season series. But the matchup with the Suns living in the mid range, and the Wolves give up the most mid range jumpers of any team in the league. That they're designed to do that with Rudy Gobert and drop coverage. Which is, we could do a whole podcast on how the Wolves should handle that related to Gobert. Jumping back to the first thing you asked me, we talked about Karl-Anthony Towns and Kevin Durant, and you mentioned that if the Wolves do guard KD with Cat, that the Suns would likely just run some games and try and, just like put him in a really tough spot defensively. Yeah. As somebody who, I watched a little bit of Suns this year, obviously not nearly as much as you, but it seemed to me like Phoenix, this is probably the case with a lot of teams, but Phoenix, given the high level of offensive talent, of individual offensive talent on the Suns, it seems like when the Suns were going bad this year, it was a lot of ISO ball, a lot of Kevin Durant, quick early in the shot clock, long twos. And when they were going well, they were running actual actions and pin downs and things like that to get, catch and shoot jumpers from all over the floor, including the mid range, but just more efficient shot making overall. I guess the question is, if the Wolves guard Durant with Cat, what do you think? Do you think the Suns just say, all right, he could beat him in ISO, he could get him in foul trouble? Or what do you want to see them do offensively? If they hit a speed bump in this series, the Wolves, the numbers say they're a historically good defense. It's the biggest gap between the best and second best defense in the league that we've seen in over 10 years and the second biggest in 20 years. So at some point, the Wolves defense will play better against the Suns. What's kind of the go-to for Phoenix, and how would they handle that Durant-Cat matchup in order to make their offense a bit more efficient? I guess that's multiple questions, but take that.
No, it's all in one, really. I mean, the way I've described that dynamic is like, can the Suns go from like a wow offense to a whoa offense, right? Like, we know that they can impress you with their overall shot making. We know they have 3 offensive guys who have scored 30. Not all of them have averaged 30 in a season. Booker's never done that, but can put up 30 on any given night. But can they be sophisticated? And we've seen that start to materialize down the stretch, right? You're going to see a lot of side pick and roll, side dribble handoffs, multiple screens involved in that. And I think in this series, it's going to be important for the Suns to utilize Nurkic as a passer in a lot of those situations, right? Have him be a dribble handoff guy. Maybe he's kind of has an option to give it up to that guy coming down the screen, or find a cutter, find a shooter on the weak side. That pulls Gobert out of the paint. I think because of some of the dynamic we talked about with Towns, you probably want Durant either as the ball handler or one of the screeners as well. Then that forces, you're probably not going to switch Gobert, right? They're going to drop him, but does Towns switch and then you can attack that in space? Does Durant pop from there? Towns is still on him, but now you have, open space on the weak side when that ball handler is now kind of headed downhill and kicks it back out. And now KD's just able to attack a Towns closeout with, open air around him. That can start to make not only the defense rotate, not only you're picking if you want to switch or not switch and how to guard it, but you're also just creating some energy around exploiting some of those mismatches. So we were saying it all along as people watching this Suns team, like, it shouldn't be this difficult. It shouldn't be this complicated. And they've figured out a way to basically simplify while also, being a little more sophisticated. So I think that's going to be their MO, in addition to the obvious stuff like we talked about on Minnesota's side. There's only so many ways to skin a cat. Take pull-up threes, find ways to score in transition, move the ball, don't get stagnant. All that stuff applies to the Suns too. But let's go to our predictions, Ben. Let's talk about how we see this series going down. I have one more question for you, though, that we didn't get to that I want to kick off the next segment with, so we'll get there coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed with your first bet. That's $150 straight into your account, win or lose. I'm dialing up Game 1 odds here in the NBA. Have to scroll past the play-in game, and we have Suns at Wolves Saturday at 12:30 Phoenix time. Wolves -2. We have Wolves -124, so that's plus odds on the Suns to win Game 1. Game 1s are weird. That doesn't always tell us a lot. Over-under 214. We saw a lot of the regular season matchups. I think 2 of them went over that number. So some tasty stuff there all across the NBA playoffs. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Ben, the question I teased there. Give me rapid fire who you see if we're talking about a game 5, 6, 7 situation. We're talking about 7.5 players in a rotation. Who is that 7-man rotation for Minnesota?
So I think it's going to be regular starters. And I talked a little on the show like, hey, would they consider mixing that up? I think the answer is no. Chris Finch he doesn't shake things up quickly, which is one of the reasons I'm a little nervous about. Can he make those adjustments throughout the series? Is he willing to do it? Right? He's a very methodical, even-keeled sort of coach in every way. So I think off the bench, I mean, obviously Naz Reid, your 6th man, may win 6th man of the year. And then Kyle Anderson normally is the next man up. And then you have Jordan McLaughlin and Monte Morris, who are both point guards, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and this is I guess part of my prediction segment as well. Part of like something I'd want to talk about more is Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I think he could win a game for the Wolves in this series. He's been that good this year in stretches. I think they went away from him too quickly last time out against the Suns. So I think that the two off the bench to watch are Naz Reid, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and then your half players, either McLaughlin or Monte Morris. Now, McLaughlin got those rotation minutes for the first time against the Suns on Sunday, which has not happened since the Monte Morris trade at the trade deadline. They've either played together when Cat was out, when they had some other injuries, they both played rotation minutes and they just did lots of 2-point guard lineups, or Monte Morris played and McLaughlin got a DNP-CD. But we've seen apparently McLaughlin take Monte Morris's role. Now we'll see if that's the case in the playoffs, but game 82 suggests that's the case. So I think you're going to see a lot of Naz Reid. You're going to see a lot of Nickeil Alexander-Walker. You're going to see a little bit of point guard minutes. There's no way Chris Finch doesn't play Kyle Anderson though. And so that's where I'm kind of stuck here. Like that's what I would do, but Chris Finch can't quit Kyle Anderson. And Kyle Anderson, to be clear, is a good player. It's a terrible matchup for him, as you alluded to. He's been, he was good shooting the ball.
I don't think he can play in this series.
No, I would be absolutely floored if Chris Finch didn't play him at all, but I would expect him to play fewer minutes based on the matchup.
Yeah, and as the series goes on, right? Like obviously, game one, you tend to roll it out. You just play you play your way, and then maybe even second half of game one, maybe you start to tinker if you're really aggressive. Otherwise, and with home court, we probably would not see the Wolves. There's a little bit of pride in not being the first team to adjust, right? Unless you really have to. So I don't think we'll see it. But yeah, I mean, I guess you could imagine a world where he could guard Kevin Durant in certain.
They tried moments. It a little on Sunday, and it wasn't good. So
no, I mean, I think on the Suns side, to just stick with the rotation and personnel before we give our real predictions here in terms of winner and games and all that, Ben, I think Drew Eubanks is in a similar situation. He's been the subject of Suns fans' ire all year long, and he is, given that he largely plays against opposing second units. And Nurkic is a typical kind of beginning of first quarter, end of second quarter, and same in the second half type of guy. That is going to put him in a position to largely probably be guarding Towns in those units where Towns is at center with Naz Reid on the court with him. That doesn't sound great. And if it's not him, then you might see some Thad Young, which he's gotten into the rotation here and there down the last week of the season for the Suns. And if he can hold up defensively, great. Not exactly inspiring a ton more optimism either, whether that's guarding him in space or down low or on a drive. I mean, he's just given up a lot of size and strength to Karl-Anthony Towns and frankly Naz Reid too. So I think that will be a big question heading into the series for the Suns, and something that could be equally damaging if they can't find an answer. If it just is kind of a black hole, maybe they have to panic and go to Durant at center, and that has its own issues. So I can see that trickle down definitely happening, and that being an area where the Wolves really have an advantage. But
and in theory, the way the Wolves built this team is they're like you said, pride. They're not going to want to play small, but they should be able to play small. Like there could be a moment in this series. Rudy Gobert hasn't played well against Phoenix this year, the season series, but he had a great season. There could be a world in which his minutes get trimmed a little in the series, as crazy as that sounds. And I know that that's like the long-standing kind of joke with Rudy is getting played off the floor in the playoffs. But this is like the one matchup where you would say, hey, Cat or Naz at the 5 and just playing small and putting, Ant at the 4 or, Jaden McDaniels at the 4. Like, that actually might work, especially if the Suns go small. And so it's kind of that push and pull in those playoff adjustments. It'll be fascinating to see who blinks first and then what those counter adjustments are.
All right. What do you got in the series?
So I hadn't, this is the first time I made the prediction on the show. I had said to a couple people earlier in the week, I thought the Suns would win the series. I thought it could be a 6-game series. I think it goes 7. And I really do. I think this is a 7-game series. My gut still tells me the Suns win it. And I know game 7's in Minnesota, and I know Timberwolves fans are going to hate that, but I think the Suns are able to pull it out. I think there's some level of the experience, the shot making, et cetera, that helps them in a game 7. It matters more in one game than it does over the course of a series. I do think the Wolves are going to have a couple of really impressive, dominant performances in this series, and it's going to be a close game 7. I hope I'm wrong. I think the Suns will end up pulling it out in game 7, but I think it's going to be a really, really fun series.
I'm looking forward to it. This happens to me every year. You know, I do some broader NBA content, and we all watch the league, and I always feel like the Suns end up playing guys that I really like, and I'm a huge Anthony Edwards fan. I think a lot of Suns fans probably are deep down, even though it might not feel like it the next 2 weeks. Like, we see a lot of Devin Booker in this guy, just in terms of play style, obviously position, everything else. So I'm looking forward to just enjoying the basketball, even though there will be some chippiness and everything that always comes along with the playoff series. But I'll pick Suns in 6. That's kind of what I've hinted at. I think that's going to be a popular pick. I'm sure that would be the betting favorite right now in the places that allow you to pick certain winner and number of games bets there. But I think every fan base outside of Denver, Ben, probably feels terrified at the prospect of their team having to go win a road game 7. Like, I just don't think anybody's comfortable with that. That's why home court matters.
Yeah.
But I tend to agree. I might still favor the Suns if it did go 7. I think they will be aggressive trying to win one of these first 2, maybe even more so than the typical team is. And so that, combined with just the things you pointed out of the advantages they would have in those kind of elimination game environments, would make me say Suns in 6. But I'm glad we're in agreement it's going to be closer, because nobody wants bad basketball here, and these teams are much more evenly matched. So there we go. All right, check out Ben on Locked On Wolves all series long. I'll be here on Locked On Suns, giving you the Phoenix perspective. Let's have some fun. Maybe some light banter in the comment section of each other's shows can go a long way. Let's not, make it ugly, but that can be fun. Go over there on Locked On Wolves, leave a little Go Suns. Maybe come get me with a Go Wolves here on the Locked On Suns channel. That will wrap us up for the day. One more show on each feed coming Friday. Enjoy the series, enjoy game 1, and we will be back before long.
All right, really fun conversation with Brendon talking Wolves Suns, and we both have the Suns winning it. That's my official prediction. I'll talk more about that. I have some other predictions for the series. I kind of alluded to. We didn't have a ton of time, but I alluded to that in the conversation with Brendon. So that's what we'll do Friday. I'll talk about some of my series predictions, a couple of kind of more bold, outlandish type not completely outlandish, but more bold predictions. A little more in depth about how I think the series will play out. Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully the Wolves do win in 7. I think this will be a really competitive series. So we'll set up everything on Friday. Of course, the Wolves play Saturday afternoon. That's a 2:30 game. And then they don't play again until Monday. There will be a postcast following the show on Saturday. I believe it'll be, I'm not sure if it'll be Jack or Tyler joining Luke on Saturday. I'll be back on Monday, and it'll be something of like, hey, it won't be a straight post-game pod because we'll be 48 hours after, but we'll talk, what happened Saturday? How does that set up Tuesday night's game 2, Tuesday evening's game 2 at 6:30 at Target Center, and what, needs to change for better or for worse for the Wolves, depending on how game 1 plays out. That's what we'll do on Monday and Tuesday, setting you up for Tuesday night's game 2. So lots coming up here in the next few days, and look forward to having you with us again on Friday. That's all we have for you today. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.